So everyone, good evening. Welcome to our Rookies and Repeats pre-Pesach Zoom and Facebook Live session. We are actually hoping that this will be two parts. We will go from 8 to 8:45 this evening and hopefully cover much of the material. We imagine we will not get to all of it, and we probably won't get to all of the questions. So in Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll reschedule this seminar for another time as well. So we're going to begin our session with a number of instructions. First of all, you are all muted. When you join the session, you are automatically muted, and you are unable to unmute yourselves. However, at the end of the time when we ask for questions, we will unmute everybody and hopefully be able to manage that way. I would like to remind you all that there is a chat function. If you are watching this in Zoom, you have the ability to send a chat message. We'll be monitoring that, and you can send questions to that chat as well. And if you're on Facebook Live, Chazan Spinner is monitoring that, and you'll be able to post your questions there as well. Okay, without any further ado, we're going to open up with Rabbi Lichter talking about Mechiras Chametz this year. And bear with me while I find him on the screen.
I'm good. I'm live. I'm live.
You're live. Good. You talk, and we'll find you and put you up on the screen.
Fantastic. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out, at least virtually, to partake in this Pesach preparation class. We hope we get to lots of topics and lots of questions that you may have. So as the rabbis discussed, we're going to start with Mechiras Chametz. Of course, you know that we generally try to sell our chametz that we cannot get rid of. So this year, as you know, there are questions about how much food perhaps will be available after Pesach, or should we be getting rid of as much chametz as possible, or should we try to hold on to some of that chametz by selling that chametz over Pesach? So first and foremost, the history of Mechiras Chametz is an interesting one, just for a second, to appreciate the fact that there are some people who only sell one type of chametz, and that's what's called chametz shelo be'en, right? If you're looking at your food item and you can't really tell if your chametz, if that food item looks like chametz, right? For example, you might have a bottle of soda, you might have a bottle of ketchup. You don't necessarily know what all the ingredients are. You won't necessarily tell from looking at it that it's chametz. So throughout the years, the Jewish people have clearly sold that type of chametz and said, good, that's a type of chametz that we can sell because it doesn't, I'm sorry, that's a type of chametz that we generally say that we can hold on to. The chametz be'en, the chametz that looks like chametz, you're looking at your breads, at your cookies, at your cereals, at your pretzels, everything that looks like real chametz. So that many people over the years have said, we're not interested in selling that chametz, we're interested in getting rid of that chametz. You know, no one's interested in having bagels in the freezer on Pesach, so let's get rid of it. As opposed to the chametz, as we said, that you don't necessarily see it inside your food item, that will sell. So that's been our history. Certainly this year, it's appropriate to sell all types of chametz. So I would tell you that in our sale of chametz, to put bagels and to put crackers and to put pretzels and cereals and cookies, everything that looks like chametz and truly is chametz, we should feel comfortable to sell all that type of chametz. How are we going to go about selling it? So in past years, what we have done is we have tried to make an appointment or just come in to the rabbi or myself, and we really do a series of 5 to 6 different modes of transaction, of kinyanim. You're familiar with the handshake. You're familiar with the various modes of transaction. We all write down what our chametz is on a shtar, on a document, and we make a kinyan with the rabbi to act as the agent on our behalf to sell our chametz to Dario. Okay. This year, because we're not going to come into physical contact with one another. We're all going to rely on filling out the sale form that you can find on the Great Neck Synagogue website, and we'll be emailing around as we get a little bit closer. We will fill out that form completely. We'll note where our chametz is, the approximate value of our chametz, and we will sign that document. We will send it back to the rabbi or myself, and we will make sure that that's included in the sale this year. And so that's the story when it comes to mechiras chametz, of selling our chametz. I would tell you that sometimes people are very careful that the chametz that they still have in their house or around this various rooms in their house, they're not comfortable with having it around where they might be. So they take that chametz that they're going to sell and they put it in the garage, or they put it in the closet, or they put it in the basement somewhere no one's ever going to go to. While that is certainly praiseworthy to do, we don't want to add any type of burden on anybody. If you have chametz that you are selling in your kitchen, you can merely keep it in the kitchen and close it and mark it clearly chametz, and you don't have to worry about bringing it, 3 floors down or bringing it outside to the garage. You can still have that chametz in and around where you might be, walking around your house for Pesach. And that's the quick ABCs to mechiras chametz this year. Rabbi.
Okay, thank you very much. So just two additional components to the mechiras chametz. I actually don't know where I am, so I don't know where my video is. There we go. Hold on a second. 2 additional components to the mechiras chametz. The first is that although you can authorize Rabbi Lichter and myself to arrange for the sale of chametz, as Rabbi Lichter explained, through the form or through the online option on our website, both of them are equally valid, either filling out the form and faxing it, scanning it, emailing it, getting it back to one of us, or actually filling out the online form on our shul website. While those are valid to authorize Rabbi Lichter and myself to act as your agent, they are not valid to actually make the transaction with the non-Jew. So Rabbi Lichter, who will authorize me, as he does each year, to arrange for the sale of all of the people of the chametz of all the people who have authorized him, I will have all of that chametz representing everyone and enter into a transaction with Dario. It will be an arm's length transaction. We'll both be gloved, we'll both be masked, but that will be the actual physical transaction that we need to enter into with Dario. One additional point, Rabbi Lichter mentioned that you can keep the chametz in your kitchen, in the cabinet, just mark it appropriately so you don't inadvertently open it and use anything from in there. Just make sure when you write down on the shtar mechira that you're authorizing us to sell, make sure that you list the location of that, say cabinet in the kitchen, because that's an important element to the mechira as well. Okay, Rabbi Lichter, Pesach cleaning, you ready?
Sure. Okay, Pesach cleaning. This is always something that's on our mind. We would clearly suggest this year to make sure that it is not a spring cleaning. Although we say that every year, this year certainly is most important to recognize that what we're doing is cleaning for chametz in our house, not for straightening up, not for organizing, not for making things clean of dirt, but clean of chametz. So that means that if we know that we've gone into rooms of our house where there's chametz, so it makes sense to vacuum and clean between the couch cushions and to do everything that we normally would for chametz. But if we're fairly certain that we never went into a room with chametz, there's no reason to have to check that room for chametz. To say that, okay, there's a 5% chance that I went into that room, you can say, okay, chances are I didn't make a mess, there's nothing there. You don't have to go into that room to check for yourself for chametz. That being said, I assume we're all home a little bit more than we normally would. It's probably one of the things that's easiest to do is to check all of our rooms for chametz. It's something that we have to do. But keep in mind what the mitzvah is and what the mitzvah is not when we check for our chametz. If we're talking about perhaps places of work, where perhaps we had to leave the places of work early, and we didn't have in mind to bring all the chametz with us as we were leaving, that's okay. We're going to include that in the sale of chametz. There's no need to have to worry about going back to work to clean that place of chametz. Our cars are also significant places to first think about it before we go clean. The winter, we saw the weather today. The inside of our cars could be very dirty, but that doesn't mean that there is chametz inside of those cars. Again, if we have children, if we're known to eat in our cars, it makes sense to take the vacuum to our cars and go and clean out our cars. If we know that we don't eat in our cars, there's no reason to go and clean for chametz in our cars. There's just plenty of work to be done. There's no reason to have to do work that is not necessary for cleaning chametz. I'm sure there's a lot more to be said on where to clean for chametz and exactly how to clean for chametz, but we'll leave it at that for now, as there are lots of pertinent issues to take care of as well on this phone call.
Okay.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Lichter. As Rabbi Lichter pointed out, we should be careful to remember, especially this year, especially with all the difficulties of having children at home and not being able to get out as much as we would like to, and all of the other pressures, that Pesach cleaning is not spring cleaning. When it gets warmer after coronavirus, Emir Hashem, you want to do all the spring cleaning you want, that's when you should do it. There's no need to do spring cleaning for Pesach just to get rid of the visible items of chametz. Okay, and the final thing, the siyum this year, Rabbi Lichter, I think you're going to talk to that also, right?
I can. I thought Seder Innovations.
Okay, go ahead. Seder Innovations then.
So Seder Innovations. Unfortunately, we know that our Sedarim are going to probably look very different this year, with who will be there, and more importantly, who will not be there. Just today, the OU and the RCA and the major Jewish organizations sent out an additional email giving us further updates, further encouragement to essentially be within our nuclear families for Pesach, with a special caution to the age group of 60 and over to perhaps make their own Sedarim and not go to children who are younger or friends or other relatives. And so we want to try to capture the feeling that a Seder gives us somehow without being there. So one of the suggestions that's been made is to have almost a mock Seder during Chol HaMoed, where perhaps we'd have a little bit more time and we can go online and we can have a Zoom Chol HaMoed Seder, just so grandparents can get a little bit of nachas from grandchildren can show off for the grandparents a little bit, and that way you can have a little bit of a Seder. There's a lot of work we know that the schools are putting into educating these children. There's a lot of tuition that is involved. So we want to take advantage of making sure that we don't lose nachas night, as Seder night is sometimes referred to as well. So be creative. We would urge you to be creative with what you can do during Chol HaMoed to try to capture the feeling of a Seder. In terms of the size of the Seder, so once again, you guys have been reading everything that we've been reading to make sure that your Sedarim are small, and again, to ensure that everyone is safe. If anyone has specific issues regarding how to make sure that perhaps an older relative feels as if they are still part of the family, but yet they have to remain alone or with another person, there are certain avenues to discuss with the rabbi or myself. That can be for further discussion as well. Rabbi, I give it back to you.
Okay, do you want to talk about the davening directions while you have the floor?
Certainly. We sent out this past Shabbos that when we're going to daven for Shabbos, certain things to keep in mind, how it's going to be different as we're davening on our own instead of with the minyan. That's certainly true for Yom Tov as well. Our minds might not necessarily be thinking that way just yet, but just to highlight a few of the changes that we might have for davening. So first and foremost is Hallel. A little bit of a debate is whether or not Hallel, when being said without a minyan, should it be said with a bracha, without a bracha? Our minhag amongst the Ashkenazim certainly, and seemingly amongst a lot of Sephardim as well, is that Hallel remains recited with a bracha, even though there will not be a minyan. That's halal. The other thing that we say on first day of Yom Tov for Pesach is Tfilas Tal. Tfilas Tal is our transition when we stop saying Mashiv HaRuach HaMorda Geshem. So that is a Tfilas Tzibor, a tefillah that is obligatory upon the tzibor, the community getting together. When we're not davening as a minyan, Tfilas Tal will not be recited. We won't forget that we will stop saying Mashiv HaRuach HaMorda Geshem, but Tfilas Tal itself will not be recited. And all of this we'll put into print and we'll email out as we get closer as well. The third thing, just to talk about changes for davening, is of course Yizkor. Yizkor on the last day of Pesach. We're accustomed to saying it all together. Obviously, Yizkor can be said without a minyan, and so that is something to be kept in mind as well. Rabbi.
Okay, Rabbi Lichter, thank you very much. Rabbi Lichter, please feel free to jump in at any time. A couple of additional issues that we want to cover in broad strokes before we turn our attention to some questions, and some questions have begun to come in. First of all, when it comes to the Siyum B'chorim. So all of you know, or many of you know, that the firstborns usually fast on Erev Pesach unless they go to a Siyum. And most firstborns actually go to Siyumim, where there is a completion of a volume of the Talmud or a Seder of Mishnayos. They actually go to Siyumim, and the person who is making the Siyum, called the Misayim, invites everyone to join him for a Sudas Mitzvah. Once you participate in that Sudas Mitzvah, so you are no longer obligated to fast for the rest of the day. So what happens this year? Because obviously we're not going to be together in Shul, and we're not going to be together with anybody to be Messiah. So Rav Shechter and others have paskined that a Siyum is valid this year, given the circumstances in which we find ourselves, through some kind of virtual connection. Meaning, and we will broadcast a Zoom Siyum. There'll probably be many Siyumim that you can join virtually. And as long as you are part of a virtual Siyum, when the Misayim invites everyone watching to participate in the Suda, so you can participate as well, and you do not need to fast that day. Obviously, the Misayim will say the Hadrans at the end of his learning, but he will not be able to say Kaddish, because although we can call it a community for the purpose of a Siyum, we don't call it a community for the purpose of Kaddish. So from that perspective, it should be much easier this year to participate in a Siyum than normally. What about Biur Chametz, the obligation of destroying Chametz? As Rabbi Lichter pointed out, one possibility is Mechiras Chametz. We can sell the Chametz that we have in our possession. But what happens to the chametz that we want to leave over in order to fulfill the mitzvah of biur chametz? So traditionally, that was done through the gracious efforts of Mitchell Siegel over the last few years. It was arranged in Kings Point Park. You came by, you dropped off your chametz in one of the burning receptacles, and you fulfilled the mitzvah of biur chametz. Obviously, that's not going to be the case this year. So we are on our own for biur chametz. What does that mean? It means go outside in your backyard, in a safe place, make a little receptacle, and burn your chametz in that receptacle. Try to keep as little chametz as possible left over for burning that chametz. It could be a slice of bread. It could be half a slice of bread. There's no shear for how much chametz you have to burn. I wouldn't make this kind of fire and you need to feed it a whole loaf of bread. That doesn't make any sense. But a small amount of chametz can be safely burned. If you don't want to create an open fire to burn it, so then I would suggest burning it in your chametz-stick barbecue grill. In other words, turning the grill on, putting the piece of bread on the grill, closing it, getting it up to its highest temperature until that bread turns into charcoal. That is, after all, what we're looking for in biur chametz. Burning it, serefa, is the preferable way to destroy chametz because it reminds us of the principle of nosar, of what was left over from the Karban Pesach, which had to be burned. So therefore, burning is the preferable way, but it's certainly not the only way to destroy chametz. You can destroy chametz in other ways as well, such as breaking it up into small crumbs and flushing it down the toilet. That also counts for biur chametz. No, you can do it that way. What about chametz, which is left over? It's in your garbage can. So my suggestion is to take your garbage can to the street before Yom Tov and to be mafkir the garbage which is in that can. Effectively saying, I don't own any of the garbage which is in that can. I don't own it. Anybody wants to come along and take it. Anybody can come along and take it. It doesn't belong to me anymore. And that way, whenever your garbage gets picked up, they are picking up chametz that no longer belongs to you. Since the chametz is in the garbage can, we really don't worry about you eating that chametz. So that's another avenue for destroying chametz. Okay, we're going to turn our attention now to probably the area that has most people a little bit nervous this year, and that is kashering kalim. Usually each year the shul has a kasher in where you can come and bring the kalim, bring the utensils that you want to have kashered, and Rabbi Lichter and I will gladly kasher these items for you. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do that this year. So the question is, how do we ourselves in our own homes fulfill this obligation of kashering utensils? So kashering utensils is actually part of a bigger question of kashering the kitchen. We sent out in the Pesach edition of the Scope instructions for kashering a kitchen, kashering all of the different elements within the kitchen. And we'd like to refer you to those instructions that are in the Pesach edition of the Scope. We will also be sending out this week some links to videos that were produced by the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County in conjunction with the OK about how to kasher, practical videos, hands-on videos about how to kasher, and we assume that those videos should be of aid to you in kashering. Of course, Rabbi Lichter and I are always available. If you have particular questions about kashering, you can email us, you can text us, you can call us, you can WhatsApp us. We are always available to go over the finer details of kashering together with you. If you have particular questions about kashering that you'd like to ask us tonight, we ask that you please first check the Pesach edition of the Scope. Hopefully you have it by now, and make sure that it's not covered in that Pesach edition. No reason to review things which are already written down, but if there's something which is not covered in that Scope and you'd like to bring it up, raise it up to us tonight, that's perfectly fine. As a general summary of kashering, we know that there are several methods of kashering. The method of kashering with which we are most familiar is the method of kashering known as hagala. Hagala is where one immerses and kashers through boiling water. If you have a big enough pot, you can fill it with boiling water and you can immerse the items that you need to have kashered in that boiling water. And of course, there are restrictions as to what kind of items can be kashered. Certainly metal, stainless steel, silver, those items can be kashered. When it comes to other materials, so I'd encourage you to look in the Scope where those other materials are listed as well. That is hagala. What do you do if you don't have a big enough pot to do that? What do you do? So what you do is you choose the largest pot that you have, and you can kasher that pot itself. And there are instructions in Scope as to how to kasher that pot. A regular achas, it's kashered by filling it up to the very top, bringing it to a rolling boil, and then putting some kind of heated non-combustible material, like a piece of brick or a large stone, in that pot to cause the boiling water to overflow the lip of that pot. Once that pot is kashered, so then you can kasher your other items in that pot. Of course, any particular questions we'll be glad to deal with. That is hagala. We use hagala as well in addition to kashering these kalim. We use a version of hagala which is called irui, pouring a source of boiling water onto, let's say, countertops or a sink to kasher countertops or a sink. And again, those instructions are very explicit in Scope. If you have questions about a particular kind of countertop or how to kasher that particularly, we are, of course, available to do that, to help you with it. If all else fails, there are services that you could hire to come in and kasher your kitchen. I can't speak for the cost effectiveness of that, but there are services that you can hire. If you access the Orthodox Union's 2020 guide to Pesach, you will see that there's an advertisement in there for a particular company, and you can call that company and they will come in, hopefully before Pesach, and kosher the entire kitchen for you, as well as any kelim that you might have. That's as far as koshering. That's Hagala. There's another element of koshering that we're also familiar with, and that is libun gamor, or libun chamor, as some refer to it, which is a very intense heat. Practically speaking, the only thing that we kosher with this kind of libun is a self-cleaning oven. You might have heard people say, well, let's take a blowtorch and we'll kosher things with the blowtorch. I would advise you not to kosher anything with a blowtorch. If there's something that needs to be koshered by a blowtorch, such as a frying pan, do not kosher it with a blowtorch. You will probably ruin the frying pan, as well as creating a dangerous situation for yourself. If you have questions about those items, please be in contact with Rabbi Lichter or with me, and we will help you to figure out what to do. But the self-cleaning oven is by definition the most intense kind of libun. It gets up to between 800 and 1,000 degrees. If you can clean out the oven, then kosher it simply by turning to its self-clean cycle. Some people put the grates from their stovetop into the oven to kosher it that way. So that's two methods. Number one is Hagala, and the other is libun chamor, or libun gamor. The third method of koshering that we're familiar with is where we take glassware that we are using throughout the year for chametz, and we're going to use it for Pesach. That glassware needs to be soaked, completely covered in water, and the water changed every 24 hours for 3 24-hour periods. You can do that in a bucket if you're only koshering a few glasses. You can do that in a bathtub if you're koshering lots of glasses, but that is the way in which we kosher glasses for Pesach. So those are the three primary methods of koshering. For particular details, we're certainly willing to respond to your questions about that. When it comes to koshering, also, some people choose an easier path, which is, you know what, I'm not koshering any pots. I'm just going to go out and buy new pots. Well, when you go out and buy new pots, or you go out and buy new silverware, or you go out to buy some new serving pieces, you're going to run into the question of tevila, the question of immersing those items in the kelim mikvah. So the kelim mikvah is currently open, but in all likelihood, within the next few days, the kelim mikvah will be closed. Not because there's any fear of the transmission of the virus through the water of the kelim mikvah. All of the physicians, I shouldn't say all, I guess all the physicians don't agree to anything, but most physicians agree that the COVID would not be transferred through the sanitized water of the kelim mikvah. However, what we don't want is a situation where we have a line of people waiting to tovel their new pots and pans, their new silverware, their new glassware in the mikvah, being very close to each other, and chas v'shalom transmitting the virus that way. So in all likelihood, over the next day or two, the kelim mikvah will be closed. So what do I do with the new kelim that I have? I just bought a pot, I just bought a set of glasses, I just bought silverware. What am I supposed to do? So we will be publicizing a document that you can read that in effect relinquishes ownership of those utensils. When you relinquish ownership of those utensils on a temporary basis, you are no longer bound to tovel them. You will be bound to tovel them when you reacquire them. You only relinquish ownership for a particular period of time. And then when you reacquire them, you will be required to tovel them. But at least this will solve the problem of toveling before Pesach. There will also be instructions, if you want, how to transfer ownership of those utensils to a non-Jew. If they belong to the non-Jew and they don't belong to you, so you can certainly use them. You have no obligation to tovel them since they're not yours, but you enter into this agreement a little bit like mechiras chametz, and those utensils will be returned to you after the stipulated period of time, at which point you will need to tovel them. Okay, our final topic for tonight is the topic of product information. So I would encourage each one of you to visit the websites of the OU, OU.org, the Chicago Rabbinical Council, the crcweb.org, as well as the stark.org, to download their guides for products over Pesach. Any questions that you might have about whether a product requires supervision or doesn't require supervision is included in these documents. All of that information is pretty much there. So I'm going to limit my remarks tonight to some very common questions that seem to be asked this year, given the fact that people are not going out to shop. People are might be wondering if they can use things that they have already in their refrigerator. So let's address that particular question. If you have something in the refrigerator which is kosher lePesach, let's say you have a package of cheese, and that package of cheese is kosher lePesach, except you've opened that package of cheese to take out some slices of that cheese to eat. Can you still use that package of cheese for Pesach? And the answer to that is yes. As long as you are sure that you haven't slabbed all of that cheese on top of a piece of bread for grilled cheese, and that bread came in contact with the other cheese in the package, you can use whatever cheese is left in that package for Pesach. So anything that you have now, which is kosher lePesach, and you'd be surprised, there are many products that are kosher lePesach all year long. Whatever you use, which is kosher lePesach now, you can continue to use that over Pesach, even if it was opened already. Whatever meat or poultry or fish that you have in your freezer now that you purchased before Pesach, you can continue to use over Pesach. You do not need to buy specifically kosher lePesach meat or kosher lePesach poultry. Pretty much all butcher shops operate under the principle that whatever they prepare during the year is kept separate and distinct from chametz. And as a result of that, you don't need to worry about it being specifically kosher lePesach. So that applies certainly to any product which you buy that is sealed with hashgacha, and it applies as well to products that you have bought from our local butcher shops here in Great Neck as well. The other areas, the other items that are generally discussed are the item of milk and the item of eggs. Milk and eggs. Can milk and eggs be used for Pesach? In other words, I have milk. Now, easily, if you could get to the store, you could buy kosher lePesach milk and use kosher lePesach milk over Pesach. But what if you didn't get to the store? What if I have a half gallon of milk and it's left over in my refrigerator and I don't have any kosher lePesach milk? Can I use that half gallon of milk? And the answer is, as long as that milk was purchased before Pesach, at a time when chametz is nullified, then that milk can be used on Pesach. We, of course, try to be stringent and buy kosher lePesach milk. But if for some reason it's beyond your ability to get that kosher lePesach milk, and we're talking about a real hardship here. We're not talking about, I don't want to ask my neighbor to go get it. My neighbor's going to the store, but I feel funny, so I'm not going to ask my neighbor. That's not this kind of situation. We're talking about a situation, I can't get anybody to deliver. I can't find anybody going to the store. I'm worried about going to the store myself. What am I going to do? Under those circumstances, if you have milk in your refrigerator, you can continue to use that milk on Pesach. Similarly, if you have eggs that you purchased before Pesach, you can continue to use those eggs over Pesach as well. Okay, so I think that's pretty much all of the topics that we've covered. I'm going to open the chat window now and see if we can try to answer some questions. And if you have some questions, so please don't hesitate to share them with us. Chazan Spinner, I'm not sure if you're on. If you are, you can text me if there are any questions. Okay, I have a question from Jason to please repeat that. I'm not exactly sure, Jason, what you want me to repeat, but I will repeat I assume it has to do with meat that you have or poultry that you have, which is in your refrigerator or in your freezer that you purchased before Pesach. So the halacha is that you can use that on Pesach without a special kosher lePesach hashgacha. Ideally, you should purchase meat or poultry with a kosher lePesach hashgacha, but we understand the situations in which we're finding ourselves these days that might not be possible, and therefore you can use any meat or poultry that you have in your refrigerator, in your freezer, that is not kosher lePesach. I hope that would, Jason, answer the question. That's what you're looking for. This presentation is recorded and it will be available on our Facebook feed. We will send it out as well. Orly is asking about seasoned meat. So the answer when it comes to seasoned meat is it needs to be kosher lePesach. In other words, if you have meat which is unseasoned, then it is fine to use for Pesach. But if you have meat, you went to a place and you bought meat, you bought hamburgers that were seasoned, or you bought a roast that was seasoned already, that cannot be used for Pesach. Somebody asked the question, why would there be a need for kosher lePesach eggs? Most people do not feel that there is a need for kosher lePesach eggs. There are some people who feel that we should be machmir, not to buy eggs which could have been laid on Pesach, could have somehow been connected to the grain food that the chickens ate on Pesach. Most people are not machmir for that, but even for those people who are, as long as they buy the eggs beforehand, that should not be a problem. Rabbi Lichter, I think we had some questions that were sent in. Perhaps you want to focus on those.
Okay. Bring them up.
Okay, you're on.
Okay.
I think Natan asked some questions earlier.
Natan had some questions. We can start with dishwashers. The ability to, so the question with dishwashers has been over the years of whether or not you need to purchase new racks for dishwashers, or can you just clean it very well through all the nooks and crannies, as they might say, and make sure that because the racks are metal with this heavy plastic coating, I believe that's what it is. So I think we're comfortable to say, Rabbi, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're comfortable to say that to clean the dishwasher well and run it through a cycle, that would be sufficient to be able to kasher for Pesach and be able to use on Pesach.
So that's correct, exactly right. The stainless steel racks are generally covered with nylon. And when it comes to nylon and when it comes to the plastic interior of the dishwasher, there is a debate among the poskim as to how you or whether you can kasher plastic for Pesach. Rav Moshe Feinstein always said you cannot kasher plastic for Pesach. Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz of the Chicago Rabbinical Council has said that you can kasher plastic for Pesach. The OU has not taken a position on it. They say there are those who do kasher, there are those who don't kasher plastic. Our general position here at the shul has been exactly as Rabbi Lichter has pointed out, that if you have a dishwasher which is made out of plastic or a dishwasher which is made out of metal, as long as it is properly cleaned, it can be kashered by running it through a cycle through its hottest temperature at a cycle with soap. And if you do not have new racks, so you can kasher the racks at the same time that you run it through that cycle. Absolutely correct.
Good. Another question that Natan raised were regarding tablecloths and dish towels. So I would suggest tablecloths and dish towels, as long as they are clean and don't have too many stains on them, and you feel like, you know, you feel like they're really clean. So then to me, there's no reason why you have to go out and buy new things. You know, the tablecloths have been in the laundry and they're good to be used. Rabbi, care to comment on that one?
Nope, once they're cleaned, you're absolutely right. As long as they've been washed and dried, they are fine to use.
Okay. Some other questions. Someone who's not feeling well, has a cough, generally stays somewhat quarantined from the rest of the family in their house. What type of obligation do they have to join the Seder? You know, if you're in the same house, There's lots of ways to join a Seder. You know, if the rest of the people are in the dining room, you can have your meal and fulfill all your mitzvahs on the couch in the next room. Depending on the sickness and depending on how you feel, obviously, I think there's a lot of leeway to see what is best for everybody involved. Obviously, if you are really sick, you don't want to get anybody else sick. So then, but you're still able to fulfill some of the mitzvahs, eating matzah, drinking 4 cups of wine. You can certainly do that in the privacy of your own room in your house. So it's a little bit of weigh the options. Rabbi, I'll give you the floor on that one.
Okay, so again, absolutely right. Remember that although our Siddharim have always been, large families sitting around the table, that's not going to be the case this year. And we want to emphasize as strongly as we can that you should not be having grandparents over to the Seder. You should not be going to grandparents' homes. We're talking here about a situation of pikuach nefesh. We're talking about people who wind up on ventilators, and we're talking about people who are dying. So this is pikuach nefesh. All of the major organizations have emphasized that, and therefore you should not invite your mother or mother-in-law over to your house, even if they live just around the corner. That is not the right thing to do. As Rabbi Lichter mentioned earlier, if there are very, very extenuating, unusual circumstances having to do with mental health and mental well-being, then we encourage you to reach out to one of the two of us as well. So the idea of fulfilling the mitzvos of the Seder in your own room is absolutely right. You do not need to fulfill the mitzvos of the Seder with anybody else. If a person is alone, he can still have a Seder, or she can still have a Seder by himself. So if you feel that your being at the table is dangerous for other people, so don't sit at the table. Stay in your room, stay in your isolation, and fulfill the mitzvos of Pesach night in your room. Okay.
There are a couple of questions just from the chat. I know just have a couple minutes left. Spices. I think the question is spices that have been used and opened before Pesach. Is there a need to buy new spices?
Right. No need to buy new spices as long as you haven't put any spoons into the spices or anything like that. Any hot spoons into the spices. As long as you've only used clean utensils with the spices, there's no problem, and you can use spices that you have before Pesach.
Okay. Coffee maker and Keurigs. There are a couple of questions about those. I know those are addressed in the scope.
So let's differentiate. A Keurig machine can be kosher for Pesach. Our scope has explicit instructions how to do that. You can also find them in the OU Pesach booklet as well. So you can kosher a Keurig, and they do make kosher LePesach. What are those little cups called?
The K-cups?
K-cups. They do make kosher LePesach K-cups. And you will actually need one in order to properly kosher your Keurig machine. And when it comes to other coffee makers, so then it depends on the nature of that particular coffee maker. Most of these coffee makers, we're talking about issues of plastic. So again, if you're going to be lenient and you are going to kosher with kosher plastic, then you can kosher them as well. If we're talking about a Shabbos urn, some people might be thinking about that. It's also covered in the Pesach edition of the scope. You do not need to kosher a Shabbos urn that you only use for hot water. You should just pour boiling water over the spout of that urn. There is no need to do anything else to that urn. We have another minute. Rabbi Lichter, anything else that we have?
Similar, a juicer.
So a juicer, as long as the juicer can be properly cleaned. I assume we're talking about a juicer where it's extracting the juice from a piece of fruit or other things. If you've only used it for items that have no Pesach problems, if you only used it for fruits or vegetables, you haven't used it for anything else, and you haven't washed it together with anything which is chametz stick, I don't see why it would be a particular issue. Obviously, try to clean it as best as you can, and if you can run hot water through it, that would be the preferable way to do it. Okay, I know that there are some other questions that I don't think that we got to. Daniela, I'm sorry. that we didn't get to your question, but I know there are some other questions. And what we'd ask you to do is to email those questions to Rabbi Lichter or to myself, and we will convene once again to answer those questions, as well as any other questions that might have come up on the session tonight. We want to thank you all for being here. And
Rabbi, can I just interrupt 1 second? Just to make it clear, you might have already, and I missed it, that lots of these answers that you gave tonight really only apply to this year's Pesach and really cannot apply to years in which perhaps the regular guidelines might apply. So just if you're unsure about that, continue to ask questions
Excellent point,
for
Rabbi
next year
Lichter.
as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful evening.